we're really excited to get this going. Again, my name is Rachel Parker Chavez. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to be heading up the inaugural Bruin Impact Challenge, which is, I'm sure, how most of you find yourself here today. Just as a quick overview, the Bruin Impact Challenge is a cross-campus competition that invites students to come up with ideas that drive positive social impact, social or environmental impact. To me, those things are inextricably linked, but both. Ideas can be big or small or anywhere really in between, as long as they're early stage and focused on creating positive impact in one of 4 tracks. So those are social ventures, creative projects, advocacy and organizing, and strategic giving are the 4 tracks that we are focused on this year. So our goal really is to provide the support and the resources that students need to cultivate these ideas that will drive positive change in their community, on campus, in their city, in their country, or in the world at large. There are 3 rounds. Just as a quick recap, there are 3 rounds in the challenge. The first is a short application, simply to determine eligibility. Eligible students will move into round 2, where they're asked to submit a proposal that outlines their idea in more detail. And then from there, proposals will be selected from each track to move forward into the final round, where students will pitch their ideas for a panel of judges and have a chance to win cash prizes from a prize pool of $10,000. So the 3 events this month, including today, are really meant to help teach some of the primary components of leading successful social impact projects, as well as help you create a more competitive proposal to get closer to that cash prize. So today specifically is all about your personal motivations, which should help inform that section of your proposal about why you're pursuing your specific idea. But as I mentioned, because of these 4 tracks, because we want to go outside of the entrepreneurship space where Startup UCLA really is the core of Startup UCLA, but we're going outside of that to these other areas like advocacy and creative projects. And so I'm really excited to have some folks come in who are experts in those areas as well, which is why I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker for today, Luke Zakedis. And Luke, I should have asked you, tell me if I am pronouncing that incorrectly. Luke is a UCLA class of 2021 political science graduate and current digital communications fellow for the U.S. House Majority Leader's Office. He's in DC right now. Luke has led advocacy projects such as the 2019 Article 6 movement to restore free speech and shared governance rights, has managed 7 student campaigns, and was the digital director of a city council campaign. He has previous experience in the offices of Governor Newsom, Representative Solwell, Representative Cisneros, excuse me. Yes, thank you. As well as human trafficking policy team and the United Nations. So pretty compelling bio there. So Luke is going to share some of his journey with you, and then we'll go ahead and go into a short Q&A. So I'll pass it on over to you, Luke.
Thank you for the introduction. And I think you got the name right. I didn't hear it, but it's Zakedis. I think you got pretty close at least. All right, cool. You already did most of my introductions. I have a lot left there, but I'm Luke Zakedis. I am a transfer student to UCLA, or I was. I graduated in 2021, went to Ohlone College. You already read off most of this, but I have mostly public sector experience and whatever you'd consider the UN multilateral, and then a little bit of NGO. I was just saying before the call really started, political campaigns are really basically startups, because you start from nothing and then it gets really big and then it literally works itself to death by November. And if you have extra money in the bank account, that's actually considered a bad move in a startup for a political campaign. So a little different strategy for us in this sector, but there's probably stuff there that translates into both. So I prepared a little bit of a slideshow kind of talking about my process for preparing advocacy and mobilization campaigns. I imagine you guys have, oh, sorry, wrong slide. I imagine you guys have thought about like your guys' startups, if you already kind of got the idea set up that you want to create kind of a positive change. One of my favorite TV shows, Silicon Valley, always the joke was like, we're going to make a world better place. That whole thing where it's kind of a cliche, but if you really put your mind to it, you really focus on like, how are we going to specifically make it a better place? There's lots of ways to do that. And the private sector, just as much as the public sector, has a place in doing that. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my process. Before you start a campaign, whether it's a marketing campaign, political campaign, advocacy campaign, you start with your why. I'm sure you all hear this all the time when you do business plans, but you need to know, like when someone asks, you have to have a pre-prepared statement of, are you trying to improve social conditions through this change? Are you trying to convey the value of a product to the consumer? Are you trying to persuade voters to vote for your candidate, or possibly why they shouldn't vote for the other candidate? There's lots of campaigns that operate far more on the latter than the former. So things to think about there. Second, I always think about what's the quantitative metric for success. You can't just be, I want to change the world, make it a better place like that. You could do one step and then you've technically done that. It's too abstract. You really have to say, we need to have X amount of votes in order to be successful. Every campaign starts out with mapping a vote estimate they want to have. Selling X amount of products is probably a little bit more comparable for you guys in the private sector. Getting city council to vote yes or no on an agenda item. Many private sector companies have to think a lot on government relations and trying to lobby city councils on zoning laws or various regulations is really important. So being kind of prepared to think about, okay, we need these exact numbers of votes if we're going to get what we need. And specifically laying out the demands that you want. 3 out of 6 demands is a quantifiable metric, because if you get 2, you lose. If you get 4, you did better than expectations. If you don't lay out an explicit plan, you're not going to get anything. So those are all things to think about. Make sure you leave it needs to have a binary component where you can lose. Like you can't just have it where you win no matter what. So those are kind of important to think about too. Third thing I usually think about is doing a policy, or for you guys, a market analysis. In policy, we have a thing called the 8-fold path of policy analysis. It's really well known. You can Google it. I'm not going to explain it all here, but it's basically the steps you take to analyze if the policy problem that you're looking at, how you should go about addressing it. One of the most simple ways of doing this is a comparative analysis of past similar successful or unsuccessful campaigns or policies, or for you guys, probably products. So this is just something as simple as look at who tried and failed before you and who succeeded before you, pull the successes, bring it into your plan, leave the failures behind, and try to avoid them as well. Understanding who has power over what you want. You need to target who is the key stakeholders, and whether they're city council, local unions, public figures, whatever they may be, and recognize that they're the ones that you need to be convincing. You need to understand how long this process will be. For you guys, it's probably how long you can last with the startup funds that you were given, or how long you can last without having any funding if you're really, really starting off like that. For campaigns, it's how much usually the candidate loans the campaign to start off, and if they can get far enough in to get, say, money from the unions or money from PACs or through small dollars, depending on what kind of campaign you're running. And then you also need to understand like how long that will take, of course. And then finally, I always say, like, is it doomed? Is it redundant? And is it based off of bad data? If it's doomed, an example I like to use is when I was first starting off as a student senator. Another senator said, let's make a basketball court. Let's get an area of campus rezoned to make a basketball court. And so we did the policy analysis, and we found out it was kind of all 3 of these. It was doomed because ed code didn't really allow it. The zoning code wouldn't allow it. And if you brought it up to the chancellor's office, it would have taken years just to get a no answer. Like it just wasn't feasible. But because we actually did our due diligence, we didn't waste a lot of time and resources. Is it redundant? And this scenario, if it was redundant, there would have been already a basketball court on campus that we just didn't know about. And so the campaign would have actually been better if we just spread awareness of previously available resources. And is it based off faulty data? That's like if we did a survey that wasn't properly done through like actual statistical processes, and it showed that the majority of campus wanted it, when in fact, no one wanted it. They just wanted a soccer field or something instead. So kind of 3 things I think about can probably be applied to the startup world as well. Okay, 4. By this point, and this is kind of an arbitrary number, but these are kind of the ones that I usually think about. The master plan for campaigns, which again are like startups that again basically kill themselves by overworking themselves. We always have these things in our master plan that we start off with. We have budget, research, comms, digital field, and then the master timeline. So these things all need to be pre-prepared before we go into a campaign. And this includes even when you're going into, like I currently work in the actual sphere of government where you're in the official side. Even then you want to have a game plan. So for budget, that's fundraising, that's revenue, expenditures. You just have to have, basic accounting measurements. It's a business, basic stuff. For research, you need to do opposition research, stakeholder research, who's the important folks, legal, policy, political environment, tracker plan, voter demographics, census data, comparative analysis. For comms, this is op-ed, speeches, talking points, rapid response for crises, print materials, paid media, earned media. Comms is huge. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I recommend if your startup is based on something that needs to communicate to the public, you have someone dedicated to this because it takes a lot of time. In the House, they're really starting to realize recently that digital comms alone, which is the next one, has really needed someone specifically working towards that because it's just comms is too big for one person sometimes. In digital comms, it's oftentimes online profiles, social media, targeting emails. Field is basically when you're on the ground with voters, probably less applicable to you guys, but targeting events, volunteer coordination, that kind of stuff. And then finally, the master timeline. In campaigns, master timelines oftentimes look like this. There's a consideration phase where for you guys to be the founders are considering whether or not they want to really go into it or not. For candidates, it's whether or not they want to put the year of their life on hold. Then there's an exploration phase where they're really exploring, okay, is this viable? Is this feasible? For you guys, kind of the same thing, maybe meeting up with early investors. Then there's a construction phase where you're really building up your infrastructure, you're constructing your plan for the launch, you're building on core staff. Launch is really important for campaigns, like because you're especially for new candidates, because you want to show this is who I am in the public sphere. You're showing your brand, you're showing who what your campaign is going to be, because you're more than just a person as a candidate, you're also a brand or a movement. And then from then there's the persuasion phase and get out to vote. You can interpret this in the private sector, I guess, as get out to vote is people buying the product, and persuasion is persuading them to buy the product before it's released. We basically want to convince voters that our candidate is the best of the options, and then get out to vote is to try to mobilize those folks we've already persuaded to actually make it to the ballot box by E-Day, which is election day. So hopefully this was a little bit informative. It's a little different than your guys' world, but something to think about. Last slide I have here, I just always kind of like to bring up. Something I say a lot is epiphanies are not a thing. They're not real, in my opinion. All your brain can do is take data into it, and then you can duplicate that, you can alter it, or you can merge various points of data. And what I'm basically saying there is you need to keep taking in original thoughts if you want to make original ideas. So I strongly recommend you read as much as you can. These are some books for advocacy specifically that have helped me kind of organize my structures for my plans, come up with unique ideas for advocacy. Rules for Radicals has great stories of kind of coming up with fun ways to mobilize folks to interesting causes, but also don't gatekeep yourself into like one area specifically. The book I'm reading today is on African dictatorships. And that doesn't have anything to do with campaigns. So adding a diverse diet of thoughts in your head is important. And with that, any questions for you? I know this is pretty different than probably most of your guys' startup talks, but if you have any questions, I'm here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luke. That was great. And especially if your idea, so for folks whose ideas fall into the advocacy and organizing track, this is really why we wanted to bring someone like Luke to speak, because it is different, obviously, than creative projects or volunteerism and giving, and of course, separate from social ventures. However, I love, Luke, how you related it back, though, as well to social ventures. So there's a lot of interconnectivity, I think, between any of the tracks in the challenge. But it's really great to hear some specifics about how to create campaigns, because that's certainly something we hope to see for some of these ideas. So if you do have questions for Luke, I would love for people on Zoom. I know most folks are on Zoom, so if you want to put those in the chat, or if you have, raise your physical or digital hand. But in the meantime, Luke, I have some questions for you. So so we'll let folks kind of think of some things. So I think a lot of young people are interested in making a positive impact. Certainly the folks who are here today, but we see kind of more traditional, at least I see more traditional volunteer opportunities a lot more prominently than advocacy work. So how did you go about finding your advocacy work as a student? And any advice for students who might be wanting to do the same?
Sure, yeah. A lot of advocacy is volunteer based off the very nature that the causes, at least in my opinion, that really matter oftentimes are extremely not profitable in any way. And so, the campaigns that I always look at and I admire, they usually don't benefit a lot of interests of big dollar donors. And so, yes, sure, I can stop screen. And so that often leads to a lot of campaigns that have unpaid internships or advocacy movements that have unpaid roles for organizers or very low paying ones. So what I find is they say all politics is local, and I strongly agree with that. And so I recommend if you're really looking into, whatever your interest area is, some are different than others, but if you're interested in political, like elected members, I would focus on most of you are probably in LA, focus on LA elections, like local city council, district, school boards, whatever it may be. Because even though you might not get paid in those, you'll be able to rise to a higher level. I was able to get a higher level position in the city council one because I decided to do that instead of working for a senatorial campaign that early on my career. And those things will kind of domino effect into larger areas. I couldn't have worked for the majority leader's office right off the bat. I had to start with the smaller ones, and those built into bigger ones, and those start producing actual careers. So I recommend starting small, focusing on things you really care about, try to become an expert in things you care about, and eventually those will produce actual opportunities in your career.
Awesome, thank you. Div has a question. If you want to unmute, go ahead.
Hi, Luke. Thank you so much for this. This was really amazing. And I learned a lot of stuff today about elections that I did not know. Like E-Day, I've never called it that before. And now I'm going to say it all the time just to sound cool to my friends. So thank you.
Nice.
My question is this. You made a really good point about having the best impact by staying local. My thing is something where I can kind of go to any major city and pick it up. It's in housing. Something that I'm kind of struggling with is understanding where I could have the most impact with the housing idea I have, and how do I really measure impact in a way that's kind of stepped, if you will, right? Because I'm sure that like the big goals that we all have, I would imagine, don't happen off the bat. So what are some ways that you kind of set up, like, I guess, your own little KPIs for impact? And then also, how do you kind of figure out what location is going to have the most promising reaction to what you're doing?
Sure, those are good questions, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation. Yeah, housing is a tricky one. I think right now you are exactly where you need to be if you're in California, because California is probably the central hub of housing conversations, in my opinion, at least. I'd recommend, are you a junior, senior? Like what year?
I'm in grad school, so.
Oh,
yeah.
You're already there. I'd say definitely participate in meeting other people in that field. So, informational interviews is a great way for like housing isn't really something I know a ton about, but if you wanted to talk antitrust, I know a lot on antitrust. And so, talking to people in the field, you'll slowly grow your perspective into one that's very nuanced, very specific, and you'll start realizing there's specific levers that you need to turn in order to get the change you want. I really think local level is probably the best for housing. When I was doing that city council campaign, housing was a very important issue. It was for Fremont, which is right south of Oakland, north of San Jose. There's a lot of housing conversations because the locals are really upset about traffic. It's a real concern to them, but we also have a homelessness crisis. So how do we balance these two interest groups? It's very tricky. But there's a lot of advocacy groups that I recommend that you connect with, and they probably know exact points of entry that will probably lead to you being most successful. As far as in campaigns where you could be most successful, I'd say try to explore, participate in campaigns, even if they're not housing, just find things that you enjoy and then figure out what you're good at. I wasn't originally interested in communications when I first started, but I kind of found after a while I was uniquely good at it, and now I really enjoy it a lot.
Awesome. No, you're very good at it. Quite talented. May I email you afterward to get the names of some of those organizations that you were talking about that I could probably outreach to?
Sure. Yeah. I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you. I promise I won't sign you up for any weird mailing. So
No problem. And feel free to add me on LinkedIn or wherever else you like.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Awesome. Thanks for that question, Div. And okay, so moving right along, last question really for you, Luke.
Hold on.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Deanna.
Yeah, no, we have a question from Austin.
I apologize. Deanna and I talked about this, and it was okay. If majority of people are on Zoom, make sure we don't lose the people in the room. So again, apologies. My new to hybrid events. Okay, yes, Austin, please go ahead.
Worries. It's a hard thing to balance. I have a question, Luke, about essentially knowing when to quit, because there were some great points brought up about how you think about campaigns. You do a lot of exploratory work and figuring things out, but within campaigns and in any endeavor, you will possibly come up against like failure or at least not gaining traction. At what point do you essentially drop that, whatever you're working on, and then pivot to something else? Do you have any?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And for campaigns, it's brutal because, imagine your startup literally has your face on the website and your name. And now when people Google you for the rest of your life, it is that one choice you made. It's brutal for the candidate and for the team, because it's a passion of love. It's not like you're not making a ton of money on the campaign unless you're a high paying consultant. So it's a hard decision. A lot of it for campaigns at least comes down to money. The tricky part, like, I don't know a ton about startups. I don't know all of your guys' financial plans, but for campaigns, you want to spend money pretty quickly so that you're not wasting time that you could be spending. Obviously, there's periods where you're going to spend more money than others, but you shouldn't be like really low on the polls, but still have a ton of cash on hand, because then you clearly have wasted an opportunity. So a lot of campaigns, it's usually like we are completely out of money and our polls are doing really poorly. Now that's really tricky on local campaigns because there are no polls. We always see the presidential races and we always imagine that the polls are always there telling us how the campaign's doing. Even congressional races sometimes don't even have very functional polls. And on local city council ones, they're next to non-existent. So it's very tricky. But endorsements for campaigns are also really important for Democrats, which is where my expertise are from. If you don't get union endorsements and you're running as, say, a progressive, that is a pretty clear sign that you're probably not going to have the financial or momentum backing that you're going to need to make it to the end of the primary or to the end of the general. So endorsements are often a good sign. I don't know how to translate that exactly into the private sector. Maybe it'd be like you miss you lose a startup competition or something like that. Maybe that's the equivalent for you guys. But endorsements can be very critical. They say Joe Biden got really far ahead because of certain endorsements he had during the primaries. So those are important. Fundraising is really important. And then also, one of the books that I had on the screen earlier was The Culture Code. And it's all about building a proper culture in your organization. I really think people kind of sleep on the concept of like, if your team morale is down, then you're not going to be going anywhere. You know, the ship is only as good as the crew. And if the team is not interested in the end goal, they're tired, they don't believe in the mission anymore, that is also a good time where it's like, okay, time to put this to rest.
Thank you for the answer. That was great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Yes, I think so many of these things, it's interesting because I wouldn't have thought that before, but it's interesting how you're making the parallels in the different sectors, because I think it's very, very true. Okay, now last question. Luke, in keeping just with the topic of tonight's event or today's event, I'd love to hear quickly before we shift gears, what drives you? This conversation, our first event, is all about finding your why and why you pursue social impact. You've brought up a couple times that you're not like making the big bucks probably, you know, in policy change and things like that, but it's something you're clearly passionate about. So I would love to hear what is your why behind pursuing the work that you do?
Sure. Yeah. Going to the #1 public university and one of the best community colleges in the state, I really feel that, government programs that are helping everyone are really important. And that only gets done, in my opinion, as a result of political actors that really care about everyone. And, we really have an issue where there isn't always expertise on things when we kind of cut down on our government through reduced social spending, and that can create laws that have loopholes and various other issues. So making sure that we have people that are really interested in, they're very much policy wonks, and they're very much people where they're like really interested in making the world a better place, like we started this conversation with. I think that's really important. I get a real kick out of it, just out of my own personal drive thing. I am one of those people where if my end goal isn't helping improve something, I get pretty tired of it. So that's kind of my thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I hear you there. That's so great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Luke. We really, really appreciate you being here and taking time from your busy schedule over there in DC to be with us, and for all the work that you're doing. So please feel free. I know you dropped your email if you want to drop your LinkedIn into the chat, and I can share that and a follow-up for folks in person as well. So yes, please, big round of a digital or physical applause for Luke. And we'll get going on. Yes, thank you so much, Luke.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move into a kind of more interactive time, and I'm super excited to introduce you to Drea, who will be leading the next section. So Diondraya Taylor is a graduate of UCLA with a Bachelor in Science in Psychobiology and a minor in entrepreneurship. She is currently pursuing her PhD in education. She has interviewed, worked with, and learned from over 100 entrepreneurs, and also has been a mentor for young women like herself and younger through service to the Women Founders Foundation, Girl Scouts, and many more organizations. She fell in love with the startup space. She recognized entrepreneurship as an amazing tool to encourage innovation, goal setting, and boldness in girls at a time where gender inequality is still very much a reality. By leveraging the unique skill set of entrepreneurship and her passion for closing societal gender gaps, she wrote her workbook, Mindset Milestones, a girl's guide to thinking like an entrepreneur, to equip girls with the skills and experiences they'll need to succeed. And she is there with some of you in person. So Drea, please go ahead and take it away.
Okay, perfect. So we can skip to the next slide, but this is basically something that I put together as I was watching Simon Sinek's TED Talk on Start With Why. If you read the book, it's awesome. If you looked at the TED Talk before, really, really great. But I pulled out a couple of points, so we're going to talk about some specific questions that'll hopefully help you flesh out your ideas, or at least how you want to communicate them a little bit more. So we're going to talk through a couple of things that might be important at whatever space that you're at, but I will introduce myself first. So Rachel, we can go to the next slide. Hybrid is an interesting situation. You know what? We love a challenge in entrepreneurship. So my name is Diondraya. I am, like Rachel said, this stuff is already up here. But I'm going to talk a little bit quickly about Mindset Milestones, which is my social enterprise. The reason I think it's so relevant to this conversation is because it actually started right in this space, back in that room over there. I had a venture consulting meeting in 2017 with one of the people here at Startup UCLA. And it took a long time, but I started with a problem. I didn't have a solution at the time. So if you are worried that you don't have an idea yet, that's completely fine. If you have a problem that you care about, you have a solution, and that's exactly how I teach it to my students. I am also an entrepreneurship teacher, which is sort of why I preface with that. I teach at an all-girls high school, and we talk about entrepreneurship as if it is problem solving. That really is the essence of what we do. I don't care if you want to have a campaign or you want to start a movement or you want to start a media company. If you're solving a problem, you're engaging in entrepreneurial activity. So we start with problems because problems are how we get to solutions that actually make sense for people, right? We talk about this all the time in entrepreneurship. People say fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Because when you start with the solution, you end up with something that people don't understand or that people don't care about. And so you have to ask these questions along the way, but this is especially important with social enterprises or anything related to trying to solve some kind of societal issue, because people have to understand where this fits. Not only who is this a problem for, but who cares about this, right? Like one of my students said, I want to solve the problem of TikTok being addictive. Great, that is absolutely wonderful. But who cares about solving that problem? Does TikTok care about solving that problem? Does solving that problem? I don't know. My gut says no, but we need to go figure out that information. We need to go look for that information. Do the teenagers that you say are having this problem care about solving this problem? Again, I have no idea, but my guess would be no, because they enjoy it. And honestly, it's a lot more fun than whatever else they have to do at the time. So if we're solving problems that people don't know they need a solution to, we still aren't getting anywhere, right? So how do we start figuring out a problem that people understand that they have and that we actually know they want to solve? So we can go to the next slide. And that is what this TED Talk, which you should definitely watch the whole one, from Simon Sinek is important, is sort of talking about with starting with your why. So it's not just about sort of leading with your purpose. Your purpose is very important, and knowing your purpose, as he points out, is something that a lot of people really can't even point to half the time. But the other piece of this that matters that people forget about is your purpose is supposed to help you decide how you make your decisions. It's not just what you tell people, it's how you build your team. It's the kinds of incentives you give people for joining you. It's how you track your information. It's what your impact metrics are. All of that needs to be directly related to the purpose or the why that you've identified. So we're going to talk about a couple of specific ways that that might be important. Yes, we can go right ahead. So the first part we're going to talk about here is Simon Sinek's concept of golden circles. You can press play. It should start exactly where I want it to. I can't hear it on this end though.
Oh.
If you click off and then click back on, it will start again where you need it to be.
Okay. Are we going to be able to hear? Oh, here we go. All right. Now it should.
This little idea explains.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result,
Okay, that's good. So this is the basic framework, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But the reason I wanted to introduce it before we go too far, and we can click the next slide. There we go. The reason I want to talk a little bit about it is because I want everyone to sort of know exactly what he was saying before we go in, because I know it might have been hard to hear, or maybe we just zoned out. That happens. We try to make room for it. So why, how, what? His approach is essentially going from the inside out. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but be thinking about these things already, like even in terms of your own ideas. What do you think you want to do? How might you want to do that? And why do you do it? If you go this way, this what is going to be so much better than the other way around. But we can't think about how we're going to do things or what our idea is going to be if we don't know why we're doing it, because we won't reach the same outcome. And I don't know if in the future you all will do like a presentation on impact models or theory of change, something related to that. But when you do get into that, you will see just how important it is that you understand how your activities, the things you say are going to do, are eventually supposed to lead to some sort of outcome. Because you will find that there is gross discordance between those two when we don't think about the why in the beginning. We have to sort of start all over again. You're finding new statistics, new metrics to prove what the problem is, because you'll realize that the problem you say you're solving is not absolutely related to the things that you're going to do and the kinds of outcomes you say you're going to have. If those aren't the same, you're not solving the same problem. So we have to start at the beginning. So that's why starting with the why will save you a lot of time and work in that regard. Next slide is going to break down a little bit more what this looks like with some examples, which hopefully will clear up the concept. Oh, this is also important. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. It's a mouthful, but it really is the point. People say this all the time, especially for new entrepreneurs. And they say it to me still, I'm still a new entrepreneur. I don't think I'll ever not be a new entrepreneur. But people care about who you are as a person or how you present what you're doing or what role you have in making this move forward a lot more than the actual thing itself. We talk about this all the time with, we think about products and we think about things that anybody could do. Why did we buy that one? Why did this one catch on? Why did this particular company make it out? There are real reasons, and they half the time don't have much to do with the actual quality of the product. How do you communicate what you're doing? Do you really lead with the things that you say you do? And can you bring other people in that process with you? That believing part is a really big key to making that happen. And he will give you an example of that now. You can go ahead and click it.
Thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse.
And he says, all I did was reverse the order. And the point being, do we care more about the actual computer, or do we care about the thing that people say they're doing? And this is just the outcome of the thing that they believe that they're doing. And he shares a really another helpful example if you're interested in sort of watching the whole thing about Apple versus, say, Dell computers. They talk about that we would probably buy, I would say the vast majority of people who are in this, who are sucked into Apple the way that many of us are, might buy something like a car or a refrigerator from Apple. That could be conceivable, right? Dell, on the other hand, tried to make TV monitors. Nobody bought them. because Dell makes computers. They're a computer company. Question is, do you want to be a computer company or an organization? Do you want to be known for doing one thing, or do you want to be known for making change in this area? Because at that point, you can do whatever you want as long as it's still related to your mission. I give you the example of my company. I have an organization company that teaches entrepreneurship curriculum to girls, but the goal is really to change our outcomes on gender equity. If there was some point where I decided to change what I actually do and say, you know what, I now want to introduce a program where I talk to boys about what it looks like to be good allies. That still fits within the umbrella of what my mission is supposed to be. That still serves the problem that I say I'm trying to solve. You can't do that if you haven't set it up that this is the place that we're trying to get to. This is the problem we're trying to solve. These are the metrics that we're looking at in order to say, we have done something helpful, we've done something good, and we've generated change. But starting with your why is the only way that that's possible, because if you stick to one thing and you are known for your what as opposed to your why, you will always have to be in that what. And you can't change that way. You can't grow or evolve, or at least it's much, much harder to do if that's where you want to start. Let's go to the next slide. And now it's your turn. There we go. So this idea of going inside out, right? Starting with why, and then how, and then what. Do you think that would, it sounds like that's supposed to be more effective, right? It sounds like that's the thing that helps people to get buy-in from you, to say, I actually find this valuable because I believe in the thing that you believe in. I believe in what you say you're trying to do, you're trying to change. So I want you to think about some organizations or companies that have a very clear sort of what, how, and why to you. And just sort of think about that for like a minute or two. And I would love for someone to share any that come to mind. Because then I want you to think about how you could apply that to what you're trying to do, even if you don't know what it is yet. What are things that you can pull from the way that they've figured out how to communicate that you might be able to emulate or model as you're starting to figure out the same things for you? It's really hard to start things from scratch. So let's come up with some examples that might be good models for this version of starting with your why. So we'll give you like a minute or two to think about that. I'm going to think of my own. Okay. If you're still finishing up, I'm going to share the one that I thought of while we did this with you. Has everyone heard of Girls Who Code? We have, if you are on Zoom, can you give me an emoji if you have heard of them? Or you can say it, that's fine too, whatever works. One emoji? Okay, so if you haven't heard of them before, Girls Who Code is a nonprofit / social enterprise that teaches coding to young girls across the country, and they're on a mission, I believe, to get to 100,000 or so young women being taught to code. The reason I picked them is because their why has always been very important to me, and it's part of the why that I have. Their why is, we can't have diverse solutions if we don't have people who build them that look like all of us, right? That's how we continue to get solutions or, programs that only work for certain kinds of body sizes or certain kinds of skin types or certain kinds of voice tones, right? All of these things are the result of not having different kinds of people in the room when we built it. Now, we can't do anything about that if we can't find a way to get them there. So their how is that we're actually going to start by teaching coders. We're going to find coders to help build those solutions. If we teach the coders, we can improve that pipeline so we actually get them in the room when we start building stuff. Our what is we teach courses that help us get those coders that build those solutions. Oh, is there a chat? Oh, I saw something in the chat, but I don't know if
It was somebody's LinkedIn.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So that said, did anyone else come up with any examples of companies that you feel like have a clear what, why, how? And you don't have to share what it is, but if you have one, can you let me know? You have one? Yeah. Awesome.
So I thought about Lyft, for example, and it roughly seems like their why would be about making transportation better in the modern day. So that would be like making it easier, cheaper, and like more environmentally friendly. And then some hows include like they have rideshare, but they also have electric scooters, and they also have bikes, and they also like I think they even integrate transit now, public transit into their apps. I guess the what is somewhat mixed with that, but yeah.
Right. No, I think that's a really great example, because if we were like Lyft is a taxi company, like their goal was to make it easier to get a taxi. That is the only thing that they do. It would be a lot harder for us to think about them with scooters, with bikes, integrated into public transportation. But we think about them, we're like, they really are a transportation company in that way that's supposed to make it more efficient for multiple people to get where they need to go. Like in my mind, that's what I think of when I think of Lyft. And if you want something that scales, or that people at the very least gives you the freedom to do what you feel is necessary to push your mission forward, then you have to be focused on that piece of what you're trying to do. How does this solve the bigger issue? If we can't talk about that, then people can't see us there. So I love that example. Great. So we can move to the next one, but I would continue to think about this one as you come up with your ideas and refer back to anything you've thought of that makes sense as a good example for you. Okay, perfect. So this next one, I will not preface. You can go ahead and play.
Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the .com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now, you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers' team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich, and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight. And no one was there to even experience it. We found out about it a few days later. And further proof that Langley was motivated by the wrong thing, the day the Wright brothers took flight, he quit. He could have said, "That's an amazing discovery, guys, and I will improve upon your technology." But he didn't.
So there's a lot of things in there to unpack we don't have all day. So I'll tell you the important ones. One, money is important. Yes, we do need money. And I have no problems with pursuing money. I think it's important that we understand money is a necessity to our project. However, if we don't know what our motivations are, or we're not motivated by things that continue to drive us, we will quit. And people say it all the time. They're like, you have to have something that you care about. You have something that motivates you. And I think that at some point we start to sort of hear it so much that it becomes like, yeah, I get it. Like, I know that I'm supposed to care. On the hard days, you will need to know why you believe this thing has to exist. Because if you don't know that, you will quit. People say it all the time. It's absolutely true. But the other part of this is, how do you inspire other people to not want to quit with you? Right? Like, all the stuff that you all are going to want to do, if it's impact driven, if it's supposed to have a social change component, it's going to be really hard to do. Otherwise, it would have been done already. So how do you get people to join you that don't care that it's hard, that want it to be hard, and that want to do it with you because they also agree that it needs to exist? That is much more difficult. So let's go to the next slide.
Most people.
There we go. So having an inspired team, especially for social enterprises, is basically going to be your lifeblood. You won't be able to pay people that much money. And frankly, you want them to care about this enough to not need it, but you also want to make sure that you can support them, right? People have basic necessities. People have lives to live. And so if you have other, like, for example, many of you are college students, if you have other college students who have the capacity to give their time and energy to something without a paycheck, amazing. That's why people say being in college is one of the best times to start a business, because you don't have to pay people salary right away. Many of them will be okay, or at least they are already thinking about what that other thing needs to be and not dependent on you for it. And in some ways also very much more ready to be visionaries because they have far fewer responsibilities. Often, not always the case, but it's more likely to find around this time. Other thing is, people are a lot more likely to help you when you say you're a college student. And so finding that support right now is going to be huge in trying to get those people. But as you think about finding them, how do we keep them motivated? How do we continue to model having this fire for the work when we start to get tired, when we start to feel like maybe this isn't working, it's not going well, the numbers aren't showing up how we need them to? What happens? So I want you to think of a couple organizations, either ones that you've worked in, whether you were volunteering, you were working, you were just there for a day. What were the things that you seemed might keep employees there? Things that made them excited, things that made them want to stay with the companies or organizations, things that made them want to continue to work harder, or even things that made you continue to want to work harder. Was it the leadership? Were there incentives? Was it that you just got really excited every time you got a report about how things were going? What were some of the things that came to your mind? So think about that for like a minute, even if they're just things that you read about, and then we won't really discuss it, but I want that to be something we like sit with for a second. So we'll give a minute to think about some organizations you think that do a good job with employee loyalty or satisfaction. So the one I thought of was actually one of the companies I work for right now, or the school that I work for right now. From the very beginning, the thing that probably made me the most motivated was that whenever I had an idea to present, they always took my ideas very seriously. That's something that's probably really difficult to find when we're young, but I think it's something that leaders will recognize, or it becomes really important if you want people to feel like they have some kind of stake in what's going on here. If you want someone who will do exactly what you say, you need to be a lot bigger than you might be right now. And even if you do get to that point, like, what's the value in that? Why did you bring this person on or hire them if you didn't believe in their ideas, if you didn't believe in their work ethic or their values or their commitment to the company or the organization? They shouldn't be there in the first place if you don't trust them. So how do you find those people? But then also, how do you treat them like equals in that space? That's something that's really important for me when it comes to staying somewhere and continuing to want to do the work. Think about what that might be for you, but also think about how you could see other places where you can integrate that once you start building your teams, if this is something you all want to pursue. Because I know I'm a solopreneur. I know how it is to want your everything to be exactly the way you want it to be. You will need help, I promise. I just hired my first employee and it's been very difficult to sort of figure it out, but it has been really, really valuable because you have someone else to talk to. You have someone else who's like, you know what, I understand what you're saying. This makes sense, that doesn't make sense. Let's see how they fit together. So finding the right people who care about what you care about is a life or death in an enterprise, an organization, or a movement that lives off of people wanting this to look different, wanting things to look different as a result of the work that you're doing. Okay, one more video clip and then we will send this home.
In the summer of 1963, 250,000 people showed up on the Mall in Washington to hear Dr. King speak. They sent out no invitations, and there was no website to check the date. How do you do that? Well, Dr. King wasn't the only man in America who was a great orator. He wasn't the only man in America who suffered in a pre-civil rights America. In fact, some of his ideas were bad, but he had a gift. He didn't go around telling people what needed to change in America. He went around and told people what he believed. I believe, I believe, I believe, he told people. And people who believed what he believed took his cause and they made it their own, and they told people. And some of those people created structures to get the word out to even more people. And lo and behold, 250,000 people showed up on the right day, on the right time to hear him speak. How many of them showed up for him? 0. They showed up for themselves. It's what they believed about America that got them to travel on a bus for 8 hours to stand in the sun in Washington in the middle of August. It's what they believed, and it wasn't about black versus white. 25% of the audience was white. Dr. King believed that there are 2 types of laws in this world, those that are made by a higher authority and those that are made by man. And not until all the laws that are made by man are consistent with the laws that are made by the higher authority will we live in a just world. It just so happens that the civil rights movement was the perfect thing to help him bring his cause to life. We followed him not for him, but for ourselves. And by the way, he gave the I have a dream speech, not the I have a plan speech. Listen to politicians now with their comprehensive 12-point plans. They're not inspiring anybody. Because there are leaders and there are those who lead. Leaders hold a position of power or authority, but those who lead inspire us.
So when I first heard this, I was awestruck because I don't think I'd ever put into context before how difficult it might be to get 250,000 people to show up somewhere on the right day, at the right time. There's no Google Calendar to check. We don't know what time. We don't have anything to tell us. It's like a massive game of telephone. People mess up what their dinner order is across 3 people. How did this happen, right? And it's this point of getting people to believe what you believe so much so that they actually want to share that with other people, that they care enough to get it right to pass on to the next person. That's called care, right? You want people to have care for your message. But in order to do that, you have to have care in the way that you put it together. It needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be put together in a way that is respectful to the people that you're talking about, respectful to the cause, respectful to all parties involved, even if they're not the intended beneficiaries. If we do that, we can create influence. So let's go to the next slide. Yes. So last thing I want you to think about are some influential people. Who are some people or organizations that you feel have done a really amazing job at getting other people to evangelize for them, to spread their message for them? People who actually want to take on what they've said or what they're doing and push that forward in other ways. There are tons of them that I can think of, but like, you know, if you think of some that spread very quickly, you'll find it's that they often fill some kind of need that people were missing. I even think about this with music. If you find a song that people love, or it's creating some kind of emotion that people were missing, that people needed to be able to express, it spreads like wildfire. I saw someone put Cash App in the
Yeah, Div did.
yeah, I saw someone put Cash App, but that is also great. Like, do you want to talk about that a little bit, Div?
Sure. I just remember at some point, because remember we had Venmo at that point. I think Zelle was already out. There were already like a whole bunch that kind of addressed the need, to be honest, that Cash App had. But I think they spoke to a very different generation. I think they addressed the need not from this like purely financial standpoint, right? And I think they were able to kind of do that. I mean, a lot of it was definitely branding, because and maybe it's because I don't use it enough or anything, but I'm not really sure how their why differed. But I can certainly say that their markets differed at that point, and their branding differed. And I think that they achieved what Venmo had hoped to achieve back in 2013. That's the feeling that I got from it.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you so much for adding that, because I think it's super important that this was a crowded space when they entered the conversation. Why did they survive at all? There needs to be something, whether it's the way you talk about it, who you're talking to about it, how you're sharing it with them. Something has to resonate with people in a way that the other things are not. And that is how you win, even if other people are doing it. Even if, you know, if you were I don't know what his name is, Samuel Pierpont Langley, who quit the day that the Wright brothers flew, there are always ways to continue to add. But in the social space in particular, if you think that the day that someone else starts doing what you're doing, that your work stops, you're not in the right space anyway. There's always more work to be done. There are always more things you can do to make more change, to build off of what other people are doing. Competition is not a bad thing when we're all looking to make things better. So how do we create gaps, or how do we fill gaps that are already in the space, as opposed to being afraid that someone's going to come in and do what we're doing? That's not where we're at. There's a lot of reframing that needs to happen in order for us to remember that. I know it took me a long time to think about, well, someone else is doing this for girls and maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Why? There are always more people that need more support. One organization cannot reach everyone in need or cannot solve all of the problems. If there's something we can do, we should do it. So take those things, figure out who inspires you, and then until you find your own points, try to find a way to take some of what inspires you to help inspire other people. You're going to need it, hopefully, to get, I believe it's a competition, right?
Yes.
You're going to need it to win, because you're going to have judges who are going to read this that are going to need to be inspired and believe that you can do what you say you're going to do. You're going to need it to find people to be on your team. You're going to need it to actually do something with this, whether or not you win the competition. If that's what you want, inspiration is absolutely the inception of all things that are useful. That said, we can go to the next slide and leave it here. I encourage you to take, you know, what we talked about here and put together 3 action items that might help you to figure out a way to make whatever your mission is more visible in the way that you do things. Even if this is just a plan, because you don't know exactly what you're going to do, think about some of the things we learned here, and they can be vague, but just don't forget them. Write them down, put them somewhere, and make sure you come back then when you want to put the application together, when you're trying to come up with the idea. Don't forget the things, and also go back and watch the whole TED Talk, because it's really awesome. We can go to the last slide now. because that's just my thank you slide with my email address. So if any of you would like to chat about anything, feel free to email me. I'm available. I love this stuff. It's what I do. So thank you.